All right, so go ahead and join me on page 87. I want to go through some examples here. We started some of this in class. Just wanted to go over it with you before you practice some here. So keep in mind our three trig ratios, sine, cosine, and tangent. We know the sine of A is opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine of A is adjacent over hypotenuse. And the tangent of A is opposite over adjacent. So when we are looking to find a missing side here, we're going to have to decide which one of these three ratios we want to use. So let's look at number 3A here that you guys practiced the other day. We've got a triangle with a hypotenuse of 10. So we know the hypotenuse. And the question is to find the adjacent side. We might call that X. That is adjacent. It's connected to the 75. All right, so we ask ourselves, we've got adjacent and we've got hypotenuse. Which one does that match? Adjacent to hypotenuse is cosine. So once we decide we're going to use cosine, we can write our equation. Cosine of our angle equals adjacent over hypotenuse. You need to always start with this equation or one of these three versions of this. Sine, cosine, or tangent equals the fraction. This is our trig equation. And then we can go to our calculator here, and we'll pull out our calculator, and we can find out for ourselves, well, what is the cosine of 75? And so let's find the cosine of 75, and there it is. And we want to write this down to 4 digits, 0.2588 equals x over 10. And then we ask ourselves, how do we solve this equation? Well, we want to get that 10 out of there, so we multiply both sides by 10. And 10 times this. Now, we can take this here, and you can hit enter, and we can go answer times 10. And there we have it, which obviously just moves the decimal 2 places over. 2.588. Usually rounding this to the nearest tenth is good enough. Let's see what they said here. Okay, they tell us what to round to. Okay, so we can round to the nearest tenth, and the final answer is good enough there. Okay, so 2.5, which actually rounds to 2.6. Okay, equals x. There we have it. All right, so we got our missing side there. Now, we can also do this. We could also take this here, and we could just take that cosine of 75 times 10, and there it is, 2.58. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at our next one. We've got an opposite side is what we want to find. So here's our angle, 35. Call that A if you want. We're looking for the opposite. Maybe I'll call that Y. And the hypotenuse. So we got opposite here is what we're looking for. And we know the adjacent. So we ask ourselves, which one of these uses opposite and adjacent? And the answer is tangent. Tangent uses opposite and adjacent. So that's the equation we want to use. We want to use a tangent equation. So we say the tangent of our angle is 35, equals the opposite over the adjacent. If you use the sine or cosine, it's not going to work for you. Okay, we don't care about the hypotenuse, so we don't want to use sine or cosine here. Okay, so tangent 35 equals x over 10, or y over 10. Okay, and we can find out, well, what is the tangent of 35? The tangent of 35 is about 0.7002. Get out of there. 0.7002 equals y over 10. How do we solve that? We can multiply both sides by 10. And so we can come back here, and we can take this one, and we can go answer times 10. Make this larger. Okay, and we get 7.002. Obviously, multiplying by 10 just moves the decimal one place. So there you have it. 7.0 is equal to y. Okay? You can also do this, by the way. We can clear that. We can come back here to the tangent 35, and just do tangent of 35 times 10. And as you get more experience with this, you'll see that that's just kind of the way you'll go. You don't need that in between step. All right, one more here. This one's a little more challenging. Let's see why. Here we want to find the hypotenuse. We'll call that x. So this is our hypotenuse. And we know what side? Here's our angle A that we know. So the reference angle is usually just the angle that you know. If you want to go find the other angle, you could, but since we already know it, let's use it. So we got opposite and hypotenuse. Which of these ratios uses opposite and hypotenuse? Well, the sine uses opposite and hypotenuse. So since sine uses opposite and hypotenuse, that's the one we want to use. We don't know the adjacent here. We don't care to know it. We're not looking for the adjacent. So we don't want to use any of the others. We want to use sine. The sine of our angle, 48, is the opposite, which is 8, over the hypotenuse, which is x. Now the little twist here is this. Let's go find the sine of 48. And the sine of 48 is 0.7431. And that equals 8 over x. Well, here's the twist. X is on the bottom. So how do we deal with that? Well, one nice way to do this is just to make this a fraction, put it over 1, and now we have a proportion. We got a fraction equal to a fraction. So we can cross multiply. So if we cross multiply this, we get 1 times 8, which is 8, equals 0.7431 times x. And now how do you solve that equation? Well, we can divide. Divide by 0.7431, divide by 0.7431, and we can go to our calculator, and we can say 8 divided by 0.7431, and that gives us an answer of 10.76, or 10.8, rather than there's 10th there. All right? So that's the idea. All right, the hypotenuse is 10.8, which is good because that's bigger than 8, so that's what we expect. Okay? All right, one last little note here, all right? You might notice here that we never really needed this. We could go like this. We can say the sine of 48. Once you're okay with the fact that the sine of 48 is just a decimal number, we could leave it as a sine of 48. So this is some decimal number over 1 equals 8 over x. Okay, so here's one shortcut you can kind of use. We can just leave it as the sine of 48 times x, or x times the sine of 48, equals 8 times 1, which is just 8. And we can divide now by, what do we want to divide by? Well, we're trying to solve for x, so leave x, divide by sine 48, whatever the sine of 48 is, and we're going to have x equals, and we can go to back to our calculator here, and we got, let's clear this here, okay? So we have 8 divided by sine 48, and there's the same answer, 10.765, which rounds to 10.8, okay? So 10.8. So that's one way that you can do this, and you don't necessarily need to find the in-between decimal number. All right, well, hope that makes sense. We're going to go practice some now.